Good day everyone, I'm Hai Samantha V. Panganiban from BSIS 2-1 major in Asian Studies. So today I will be discussing the American and the French Revolutions. The American Revolution of 1776 and the French Revolution of 1789 signaled the introduction of a new idea that unraveled the political orders of European societies. So the popular sovereignty was the core idea of revolution. It is the political principle that governments must derive their legitimacy from the people over whom they rule. It challenged the principle of divine rights of kings. The French Revolution did not start as a revolution but a resistance against King Louis XVI's attempts to raise the taxes. So the Reign of Terror was a period of state-sanctioned violence and mass execution during the French Revolution. So the French Republic instituted the levée en masse, which was a French policy for military conscription. It was first decreed during the French Revolutionary Wars in 1792 to 1799. In 1793, when all able-bodied unmarried men between the ages of 18 to 15 were required to enlist. So another problem for French Republic was constant fighting, domestic political conflicts, economic difficulties that led to political instability.
Napoleon Bonaparte. He was born on August 15, 1769 at Ajaccio, Corsica and died on May 5, 1821 at St. Helena Island. He was a French general, first consul from 799 to 1804 and emperor of the French from 1804 to 1814, and he was one of the most celebrated personages in the history of the West. Napoleon reformed military organizations and training, supported the Napoleonic Code, which served as a model for succeeding civil law systems, reorganized education, and negotiated the long-lasting Concordat with the Vatican. Napoleon started a campaign of conquest. The Napoleonic Wars were a series of battles fought between France, Europe, enters another 13-year war from 1802 to 1815. The Napoleonic Wars. The Napoleonic Wars started from 1802 to 1815, which immersed Europe in a 13-year conflict. The United States succeeded in remaining neutral but suffered from impressment, British seizure of British-born naturalized U.S. citizens into the British Navy. Napoleon's invasion of Russia proved to be a fatal mistake because the Russians used a scorch and burn strategy, killing all their crops and livestock to starve the French soldiers. Napoleon and British commanders focused on European concerns during this time of war, but the struggle spilled over into the Atlantic. Napoleon's march across Europe was effectively halted by the Russian invasion, and he was exiled to the Mediterranean island of Elba, a dreadful and debilitating occurrence. Napoleon's attempt to conquer Russia in 1812 was thwarted by a number of factors, including bad logistics, poor discipline, sickness, and not least, the weather. Because of its impact on the rest of Europe, the French Revolution was the primary cause of the Napoleonic Wars. Concert of Europe. The Quadruple Alliance destroyed Napoleon and his first French Empire, and the Concert of Europe was created by the powers of Austria, Prussia, the Russian Empire, and the United Kingdom. France was eventually admitted as the Concert's fifth member. Concert of Europe is the system instituted a certain multilateralism that was expressed through congresses and conferences and was based on the values of a shared civilization. The Concert of Europe also began in Vienna in 1815 and ended a century later with the outbreak of the First World War. Napoleon's way of death is mysterious. He died of stomach cancer 6 years later, and his remains was transported to Paris in 1840, where it was interred in the Hotel des Invalides. The French Revolution marked the beginning of modern nationalism.
Hi, I'm Aubrey, and for this part, I'm going to explain an important ideology. To begin, let us define nationalism. It is a modern movement that people have been bound by their home soil, their parents' traditions, and established local governments throughout the history. Still, nationalism has become a universally accepted sentiment, leading to the public and private life that it was not until the late 18th century that it was shaped. It is the biggest determinant in the modern history. It is born with the French Revolution of the year 1789, which arises from crisis, economy, growth, and famine. It is instrumental in the emergence and growth of the modern nationalism. The idea that states should present and serves the interests of the sovereign people of the nation. Next, let's answer the question why nationalism became popular. When people began to dislike monarchy system and they also began to be loyal to their country, not to the leaders, specifically kings and queens, especially when they formed hatred towards Napoleon, a French political leader who rose to prominence during the French Revolution. People that time stand for themselves and for their country. Next, let's talk about nationalism and its three major components. First, nationalism entails an emotional or psychological sense of affinity among people who share an ethnic, cultural, and linguistic heritage. Second, modern nationalism embraces the doctrine of the popular. Third, modern nationalism places a high value on ethnic or national self-determination, which it is similar to patriotism, which people shows the devotion and support for their own country. Nationalism outweighs the other interests that people are expected by the government to be very proud of their nation, and the people are also expected to be devoted to the nation and willing to fight for it. The people of the country will prosper individually as well as society if they work with unity and be committed to the nation. Nationalism is very important in the case of nations which have unity in diversity. That's for my part. Thank you for having attention to details. God bless you.
Multinational state and multi-state nation. So, a multinational state, a single state or government ruling over people of many distinct ethnic identities. So, basically, a multinational state is generally multilingual or multicultural since it is composed of two or more nations or states. More problematic was Europe's major multinational state. For example, within Austria-Hungary, there were at least 10 different ethnic groups, Germans, Hungarians, Romanians, Czechs, and so on. Since ayun nga, multinational state is composed of more than one country with different ethnic groups, the problem here is if they feel that they are being abused or separated from the others, they will demand for self-government and independence. Another example of multinational state is the United Kingdom, where it is composed of four nations, the English, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. So next is multi-state nation. So the difference between multinational state and multi-state nation is that multinational state encompasses different nationalities within its border, while multi-state nation, a nation whose geographical territory does not lie within the borders of a single country. There were also several multi-state nations in which national or ethnic group was divided in several states. For example, there was no such country as Germany existed before 1871. It was divided in several states, Prussia, Bavaria, etc. So another example of multi-state nation is the Korea. It is a one nation that is divided in 1945 into two states, the North Korea and South Korea. Nationalism had a different impact depending on the particular ethnic or political configuration. So in the case of Austrian-Hungarian Empire, nationalism was a disintegrative force. As different ethnic groups demanded greater autonomy and independence, central government found it necessary to expand resources and effort to suppress national movements. The spread of nationalism weakened states composed of different ethnic groups. For Austrian-Hungarian Empire, nationalism was a disintegrative force. Because just like what I have said earlier, the problem of being a multinational state is that when the people and the country demand for their independence, wala na silang magagawa o magkakaroon lamang ng war. That's why nationalism for them was a disintegrating force because it led to the separation of the Austria-Hungary. Unlike in Germany, Nationalism proved opposite effect where it led to creation of larger and powerful political entities. So nationalism for Germany was an integrating force because it led to the unification of the different states. So thus nationalism was both destructive, disintegrating force and creative, integrating force.
The next one is Industrial Revolution. But first, what is Industrial Revolution? Industrial Revolution is the change in manufacturing and transportation that began with fewer things being made by hand, but instead made using machines in larger scale factories. Before mid-1800s, European societies were primarily agricultural or based on farming, but with the spread of industrialism, people began working in factories. This industrial revolution changed European societies in ways that reinforced many developments associated with nationalism, particularly the erosion of monarchical rule. This created new economic and social classes, like small elite of wealthy barons, middle class managers, entrepreneurs, and urban working class. They demanded greater voice in government or the power and influence to make a decision about something, and by this, the monarchs failed to reserve the existence of political order. And in 19th century, powers of the monarchs were gradually eroded.
Now let's proceed to the number two. The wealth, weapons, and technology created in the Industrial Revolution widened the gap between the Europe and the non-Western world. So basically, through the development of steam power, industrialization, the establishment of a global economy, the medical advancements, and military technologies, technological advancements undoubtedly played a vital role in the facilitation of European colonial expansion. Now let's proceed to the number two. The wealth, weapons, and technology created in the Industrial Revolution widened the gap between Europe and the non-Western world. So basically, through the development of steam power, industrialization, the establishment of a global economy, medical advancements, and military technologies, technological advancements undoubtedly played a vital role in the facilitation of European colonial expansion. So these changes allowed civilizations to gain access to new territories, obtain resources, and safeguard trade routes. On the contrary, by 1900s, very few areas of Asia and Africa were free of European domination. So which country in Asia was not controlled by European countries? Thailand appears to be the only nation in Southeast Asia that has not been conquered by European forces. So primarily, France has set its sights on colonizing the whole of Thailand. France went on to propose cutting Thailand in half, but bilateral talks and its diplomacy resulted in a treaty being established in 1896 that promised to preserve Thailand's independence and serve as a buffer zone between the two nations. So, which African country was free from European domination in 1900s? In fact, two countries prevail and one of which is Ethiopia. With its notably effective military resistance during the late 19th century scramble for Africa, Ethiopia gained worldwide renown as the only African country to fight a European colonial power while maintaining its independence from the colonial powers. So, see, Ethiopia is one of the few African countries to have maintained its independence throughout the time of European colonization, and this was not the first African triumph against Western invaders, but it was the first time an African force put a definite end to the operations of a colonial country. Next in the line is Liberia. When it comes to Liberia, if you've never heard of it before, it is a nation in Western Africa and Africa's oldest republic. But it became famous in the 1990s due to its long-running, deadly civil war and its participation in the conflict in neighboring Sierra Leone. And due to its status as the continent's first and oldest modern republic, Liberia stands apart as the only African country to have declared its independence without being forced to do so by another nation. So, throughout the European colonial period, Liberia maintained and preserved its independence. Next, let's proceed to the Industrial Revolution allowed for the production of very cheap commodities in vast quantities. Because of an ever increasing population and an ever expanding British Empire, there was a significant rise in the amount of cotton created, and it was produced at a lower cost. So, in this essence, cotton's development to worldwide dominance was a product of the Cultural Revolution of Europe and the expansion of the British commercial empire. In line with this, which was the most important commodity of the Industrial Revolution? So basically, it's the coal. Coal prevailed throughout the British Industrial Revolution. Coal figured prominently in the Industrial Revolution and continues to be a major source of energy for some of the world's most developed nations. Now, how did the Industrial Revolution make goods cheaper? It is because mass manufacturing cut the prices of much needed tools, clothing, and other household necessities for the general public, allowing individuals to save money for other things and accumulate personal wealth. And not just clothes and canned goods, but also guns, ammunition, and military uniforms. So these goods were made to help the European powers to protect and extend their territories. So as a result, the production for commodities of commodities is highly reliant on manufacturing, production tools, and the individuals who are directly engaged in the development of a product. Thank you.